My family's business is words. My father was a professional writer. He founded the Times crossword puzzle. My sister was an eminent translator. My grandfather was a journalist. He was the second in command of the Observer newspaper. I remember when I was 12, sitting him down and quizzing him. And I was a kid with a very low boredom threshold, and I thought, this is for me.
How did I get into journalism? It wasn't something I'd been doing it wasn't something I was doing at university. At university I was studying. But I became aware that journalism ticked lots of boxes, and rather than deciding I want to be a journalist, I decided I want to write, I want to use my foreign languages, I want to travel, I want to be nosy, I want to witness interesting things, I want to meet all manner of different people, I want to have access to, if you like, living various different lives vicariously. Situations are very complicated and very nuanced, and a story is never straightforward, and I really liked, I got a lot of satisfaction in finding the nuance of the story and also the people involved, the characters involved, finding people who themselves are good storytellers and telling their stories, which particularly lends itself to television, because if you're telling a story in television, you need a good character, people who can lead the viewer through the story.
I wanted to become a lawyer. I went to, when I was 15, I was at grammar school in Hampshire, and I went to Crown Court in Winchester. There was a rape case. I just walked into a case. It was a rape case. There was, what was happening was the defence lawyer, and remember I wanted to be a defence lawyer, was ripping the character of the victim to pieces. And I thought, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be a lawyer anymore. And then at parents' evening, a guy from the Southern Evening Echo came along, and he said, I wanted to be, people think journalism is glamorous. I'm going home and watching Miss World just like everybody else. So he's just really funny and really likeable. So I kind of thought, that's great, I'll do that.
We are desperate for world exclusive. So you can sacrifice ethics just to put that world exclusive on it. That's what everybody wants. They seem to think that people are really impressed by world exclusive, and therefore they're going to carry on watching you. I was going to be a footballer, so I had a chance to turn professional for a small club, and I didn't, because I didn't think I'd advance very far. And then I became a journalist, and then I loved it. Northants Press Agency, a regional news agency in the UK, where I learned very quickly, whatever. And then I after two years, I went on an evening newspaper, and then I went to Fleet Street, and then I travelled around the world for 2.5 years, and I worked in regional television and then national television, and then I became a foreign correspondent. So it's a natural kind of progression.
Once you've seen, history writ large, once you've seen Mandela walk to freedom, I was there for the funeral and the burial of the Ayatollah Khomeini. Once you've seen that, once you've seen the siege of Sarajevo, the goings on here in the British Parliament are not exactly going to grip your attention. As I said, I was ill quite a lot as a child, and I spent a long time sitting in doctors' waiting rooms. And in doctors' waiting rooms, there used to be a big magazine called the Illustrated London News. And they always had good coverage of fighting wherever it was, Cyprus, Congo, etc. And I'd be mesmerised by these photographs. I also spent part of my childhood in East Africa and just had a fundamental interest in foreign affairs. And although I had to go through a fairly circuitous route to get to where I wanted to get to, I still ended up doing what I consider to be the best job in the world.
So the media is it's changed an awful lot. I think probably I often say with people like Martin Bell, we always say we had the best of it. There was a good budget. They could afford to send you there. They could afford to keep you there. There was genuine appetite. But now it's less of an appetite and less of a budget.
Well, journalism isn't anything fancy, but it is our way, society's way, the public's way of understanding what's happening in the world, and it reflects that public. I'd like to think that the journalism in Britain is more or less, it reflects our society and the way our society thinks and worries about things, what it wants to spend money on, what it doesn't.
I think I lived in a golden age. When you had your camera beside you, you went out and reported, and you brought the stuff back. Everything changed after 9/11, when people doing what I used to do were terrorized, essentially, where they were targeted. In war zones you could be targeted, ransomed. I've got a good friend, Anthony Lloyd of the Times, who was shot in both ankles, so he couldn't escape. So from that point on, journalism tended to be done from rooftops and distant hotels. So a lot of the pictures now are collected by drones. There's not in the sense of being there. In the way that I was there when Vukovar fell, you can't do that in Aleppo or Homs or, frankly, anywhere else. It's too dangerous.
What I would say in general about how foreign reporting has evolved since the Balkan Wars is that when I was in the former Yugoslavia, as a journalist, if you were killed or injured, and journalists were, it was more an unfortunate accident. Whereas now, journalists are very much seen by several of the parties to any conflict or situation as being a player.
On the ground, I would endeavour to find someone to give me a good briefing, first and foremost. Gathering of information, particularly working in a war zone, is a prerequisite, because the one time I didn't was when I first went to Israel, and I got to the airport and I hired a car. Big mistake, it had Israeli number plates. Didn't realise that would be an issue. Second big mistake was to get open a map of Israel, and I had to get right to the north, to the Lebanese border, because they'd been fighting up there. So the second big mistake was to get a map and to go, oh, well, that road goes straight up. What I didn't realise was the road went straight through the West Bank. And with Israeli number plates, you really didn't want to be driving through the West Bank. As a result of which, I hadn't got very far when a big brick came through my window. And it was a very salutary lesson in wherever you're going, get as much bloody information before you start.
In the beginning, when I was a freelance, usually went to places where it was too dangerous for most people to go. That's when I went to Somalia, because people were leaving Somalia, and I went. People sometimes say people like me we're war junkies. A friend of mine, a cameraman, he wrote a thing called War Junkie. Are we addicts to adrenaline? Do we need war? I don't need war now. I don't know if I needed war, but what I needed was, having got engrossed in something like Bosnia, I needed to tell the story the best way I could. And I've realised in my career that you can't get the best story from sitting in the Holiday Inn in Sarajevo. You have to go out to places where people are not going, because everyone had a story.
You can't write it from a rooftop 20 miles away, because you don't know what's happening. You need to see it. You need to feel the bullet parting your hair. It actually, you can hear it. It's sort of, it draws the air, and it's an extraordinary noise.
To power and money, or tell truth about power and money often doesn't like that. So the interesting bit for me is when somebody says, shut up, to ordinary people. And that's the bit where, I much prefer staying in bed or going to the pub. But the thing that will get me out of bed and keep me out of the pub is when somebody with power and money says, you shut up or things will not go well for you. That's hello. Hello, hi, I'm John Sweeney. Why did you do this? All of that, I love that. And then the threatening letters from the lawyers, terrific. It means you're doing your job. or the problem, the constant problem is finding bosses and money who can support you. So it gets bad when you're suddenly, you take a risk or whatever, and then you're on your own. That's bad. And that's happened a couple of times.
The most unrecognised form of this whole profession, especially now when money's short, because they'll say, freelance, can you go there, get this material in a dangerous place? They pay you sort of well. I mean, certain BBC correspondents, I'm not going to name them, but I know have bought material from people on the ground, put it into their package and won an award. But it's not. They think of the credit to the person on the ground. They haven't said, this wasn't my material, I wasn't there. This is the dishonesty in our profession. And I realise that people have this huge appetite for war. You know, and programmes want to see war, but they're scared. Like, for example, the BBC would come to me and say, are you going such and such a place? And I'd say, well, if you want me to, give me an assignment. Oh, no, we couldn't do that because that'd be asking you to go to a dangerous place. But if you go, we'll take your stuff. And I said, well, you're being a bit hypocritical here.
I think it was 9/11. I think the rise of the Islamic extremists, they realised that, and this is something that's hardly written about, but if you kidnap a Western journalist, it's like capturing an ATM machine. The news organisations will pay huge ransoms. So on the whole, they don't send people out anymore.
In Belgrade, NATO was actively bombing. Therefore, journalists were associated with the countries whose passports they carried. Iraq, you know, the United States and Britain invaded Iraq. Then you have, you know, these non-state actors like the so-called Islamic State or Daesh group who have an ideology which is not geographically constrained, although they seek to control territory in order to, you know, establish a caliphate or whatever. And in their case, Western journalists are seen as representatives of a culture or a kind of, you know, empire which they are hostile to. And so again, Western journalists become a player in their eyes.
I had a bullet that parted my hair on the balcony of the hotel in Leisure, and I dug it out. It was live on television. I dug it out of the wall, put it in my pocket. I thought, this is my lucky bullet. And then when I got wounded. I managed to be wounded by the Serbs and robbed by the French on the same day. When I got my jacket back, they'd taken my passport, my cash, and the silver bullet, so it's all gone.
Any society where good and brave reporters exist, there's some hope left.